Bill, we're here. We're back. How are you today?
Thrilled to be here.
Hey, everybody. I'm Eric Shad. I'm the founder of Thrivality and FDN, Functional Health Detective, if you will. And I'm joined today by Bill Reddy, licensed acupuncturist and Kung Fu wizard.
And we're here today to talk about sleep and
Yes.
insomnia.
Insomnia. Bill, have you ever had insomnia?
Rarely, actually. I'm so lucky I didn't, except for having some pain. And when I had some pain, then I wasn't sleeping well. And sleep is the glue that holds us together. And for people who are watching, there's all kinds of things that sleep does. It not only helps us heal, but it also mitigates pro-inflammatory cytokines. There are things that there's something called the glymphatic system. Everyone's known of the lymphatic system, which are branches throughout our whole body that's involved with our immune system. But the glymphatic system is in our brain, and it washes itself during a particular part of sleep. And if you don't get that wash, then there can be some real problems.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that leads to a lot of problems with, I think, Alzheimer's and dementia and things like that, right? Because that glymphatic system isn't, kind of coming forward and flushing, the brain and then dumping it through the lymphatic system, I think. Right. So glymphatic goes into lymphatic, what do you think, right? Yeah. So that's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah, it also helps with the collection or consolidation of memories, which is really important. So with people who are in school, if they get poor sleep, then they're not going to be performing as well. So well, so today we're going to be talking about sleep, insomnia, and some of the markers of insomnia, some of the contributors to it, and then some of the things you can measure to kind of help figure out what's going on. And just I've had my share of issues with particularly early wake-ups, right? So for me, it's kind of come, I'll wake up. Oops, camera's auto-adjusting here. It's got a mind of its own.
Yeah, it's my hand signals. And when I wave my hand at the AI little engine in there says, oh, let's adjust. And so, I've had my challenges with, early wake-ups, waking up at 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning, feeling quite wide awake, and then can't go back to sleep. And it's not fun because you end up getting like 5.5, maybe 6 hours of sleep. And I know for me personally, I need like that full 7.5 hours to really kind of feel at my game. So it's not fun. So Bill, what types of insomnia are there?
So in traditional Chinese medicine, there's actually about 6 different differentiations for sleep disorders. What I typically ask my patients are you having trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, or both? And each one has its own etiology, which of course you'll be going over in a little bit. But it's some of the major issues are sugar regulation.
Yeah.
So if you have trouble, if you have no problem falling asleep, but then staying asleep is an issue, and you tend to wake up at a specific time, let's say 2 hours after you wake up. A lot of times it's your body saying, excuse me, I'm going hypoglycemic. So during the day when you're hypoglycemic, you start to get a little bit tired, but at night, if that glucose level in your brain continues its path, then you're going to go into a coma. And so your body says, hey, I don't like that, and taps you on the shoulder to wake you up. So I usually recommend to my patients just take a small palmful of nuts, some kind of protein before you go to sleep. And if you make it through the night, we know it's a sugar handling problem. If not, then for women, a lot of times it has to do with hormones. And usually people who are perimenopausal or postmenopausal women will suffer.
Yeah, from hormone disruptions. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned 6 in Chinese medicine. On my list, I've got 4 or 5 different types, and they're definitely all typically can be interconnected, right? So one would be hormones or HPA axis dysregulation, right? So the adrenals are exhausted, and sometimes that can lead to a host of problems. One of which being you wake up in the in the middle of the night. So gut infection, right? So gut issues. Parasites have a different sleep-wake cycle than you, but than humans, and so they can kick off things. The other thing I've definitely dealt with was histamine intolerance, right? So histamine, if you've got gut issues, sometimes you can build up histamine. That can create itchiness, anxiety, and definitely has been a factor, in some of my, sleep challenges. Certainly the biliary or the liver system, right? So the biliary compromises this whole thing of the gallbladder and the liver and the ducts and that handle the bile. They can, so at night, your body's trying to detoxify, right? The liver, the peak of the liver in what Chinese medicine is 1 to 3 a.m. So if that process gets a little, if there's like stasis in the liver, right, then that can cause, a backup and problems. Certainly you mentioned blood sugar, right? So if the blood sugar drops, then the body will kick in cortisol to kind of wake you up to make sure you get something to eat. And then I don't know if you've seen this, but certainly, autonomic nervous system or vagal tone, vagal nerve issues, like if people are, so this would be stress, right? If people are really stressed, this can show up in autonomic nervous system dysregulation. So.
Yeah, and something to keep in mind also is anxiety. Is that anxiety has a bidirectional effect with insomnia. And so what that means is that people who are quite anxious, their sleep quality is poor because their serotonin level is down, and serotonin breaks down into melatonin, which helps you sleep. But on the other side of the coin, if you're not sleeping well, then that can cause you to become more anxious. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of my
it can be a vicious cycle, right? Yeah, it can be a really vicious cycle, right? When you start to not sleep well, then you become more anxious, and then you go to bed, and then the thought loops keep going, and the little mouse cage in your brain doesn't turn off, and it just keeps going and going and going, and so that propels more anxiety. So.
Yeah. And so there's a number of approaches, which of course you're talking more nutritional, which you can talk about. For me, even cognitive behavioral therapy is something where they try to, if you think about it, most things you can, if you work hard enough, you can win. And sleep is one of the few things that should be effortless. You just relax into it and you go to sleep. But unfortunately, when you're thinking about it, and you make it harder. And so, and I'm not an expert in cognitive behavioral therapy, but I do know that there are things that they recommend to help you sleep better. So, and of course, acupuncture also helps with increasing melatonin in your brain in a more natural way to help you sleep.
But yeah, I think that's really well articulated, because one of the things I've noticed is when, like, if you've got to give a speech and you're really nervous about getting up in front of a crowd of people, you just power through it, right? You can just power through it, but sleep you can't really power through. You have to relax into it, and I think that's one of the difficulties of sleep is when you get anxious about even when you have anxiety and stress, and then you can't sleep, and then that makes you more anxious the next night. You try to go to sleep. So kind of behavioral therapy is, how would you describe that? Where would someone go to get it? How would you?
So not all therapists do that technique, but those who do, are listed on Psychology Today as type of, find a practitioner type thing, and you can say CBT for cognitive behavioral therapy, and you'll see what comes up. But the other thing is people who their brain won't shut up. They're trying to sleep. They're exhausted because their cortisol levels are off the charts and everything. And so for those folks, actually L-Theanine is really great for them, and that's what's found in green tea. And so green tea has caffeine that perks you up, but then it's got the L-Theanine, which keeps you calm.
Yeah. Which
I really like that balance. So for someone who is really having trouble and their brain is going overboard, then taking about 100 milligrams of L-Theanine right before they go to sleep is very, very helpful.
Yeah. And what about GABA? Have you taken GABA, like that neurotransmitter that can be helpful?
I've had patients take that, and it's definitely a go-to. Also, 5-HTP, which is hydroxytryptophan, is another precursor to melatonin. But if you're taking any kind of MAO, which is a monooxidase inhibitor, or SSRI, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, those are things, right, exactly, because you can have what's called serotonergic syndrome, which means you have too too much serotonin in your body. I really haven't seen that clinically, but they say no bueno if you're on anti-anxiety meds and you do the 5-HTP. I don't know about the GABA. I haven't looked into that. Do you have...
Yeah. So GABA's in a lot of these different sleep formulas. Because it's calming, right? So GABA is very, tends to be the calming neurotransmitter. So it's in a number of varieties. There's one formulas. There's one called Sensoril, or that's one of these proprietary compounds that they've developed that's got like L-Theanine and GABA and
maybe melatonin.
Yeah, well, it's got melatonin, but there's this Relora's got this thing in there. It's I can't think of the name offhand.
Okay.
But it's supposed to be, kind of calming. So if people are experiencing anxiety before they go to sleep, L-Theanine, GABA, if you can Google like Relora, that's Relora.
And then there's also some natural, not tranquilizers, more like sedatives, like valerian root and passion flower.
That can be helpful.
But then they can also, you can wake up with just a little bit of a hangover from them.
Yeah.
People who take Benadryl, that actually is an anticholinergic drug, which means that it can lead to Alzheimer's. So there's something called ACBC, which is a calculator. So it's acbc.com. And you can go and you can put in all the drugs that you're taking and find out what kind of threat you have to lead towards dementia.
Yeah. I know a lot of people take Benadryl, but as you noted, it can be problematic. I've had pretty good experience. Like if you've got an histamine intolerance issue, I've had good luck with something called Histaquel, which is a product from Research Nutritionals, which kind of helps calm histamine down. And then ketotifen, depending on how you pronounce it, is a medication that's an antihistamine that's very calming. So I've had pretty good luck, with those two compounds, if you've got a histamine issue. Okay, so if someone's dealing with anxiety, then they could try cognitive behavioral therapy, L-Theanine, GABA as supplements, some of these other compounds. What about like EMDR or EFT or some of these other things? And then I think you have something that you like. It starts with an N. I don't remember what it's called. NET, something like that. That's more for trauma, but I don't know. Could that be applied for sleep?
So that's a neuro-emotional technique.
Okay.
And I don't have enough experience with it to know the length and breadth of what it can handle. Some people who have really severe insomnia can be helped with transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, where they put this goofy cap on your head. And first they do an EEG to find out what your brain patterns are, and then this is a way of influencing it. So it's non-invasive, and people who are really suffering, even for years and years with insomnia, can help get that resolved. So acupuncture also is good, but it's multiple sessions. It's not like one and done. And that's true for the TMS as well. It's
you got to commit to multiple sessions.
Yes, but once you're done, you're pretty well fixed.
Yeah.
And a lot of folks who have PTSD will also have poor sleep habits, and so that's something that can also be helpful for PTSD folks.
Yeah. Cool. Well, let's talk a little bit more about some of the other areas that can contribute to sleep issues. So, I mentioned histamine and gut issues, so that can be, a real cause of it. And I've mentioned taking ketotifen and Histaquel. So mast cell activation syndrome, right? So mast cells produce histamine. If you've got gut dysbiosis, that can be exacerbated. And as your gut gets imbalanced, then sometimes that affects your ability to produce DIO, which is the enzyme that breaks down histamine, so you may not have good histamine clearance issues. So that can be a real cause of sleep problems for people. And I know that was one of the primary triggers in my own journey, and it was almost life-changing when we kind of finally put the pieces together. For me, it was also H. pylori related. So H. pylori is a commensal bacteria, but when it gets out of balance, it can be problematic. And so, it's histamine producing. So it was kind of a combination of gut dysbiosis, H. pylori out of balance, producing excess histamine, and then that would trigger irritation in the middle of the night, and that would wake me up, and I would feel just like wide awake for the first half hour. And then you realize, oh my God, I've slept the full night, and so not fun. So any comments or thoughts on? histamine.
Just, when you're talking about how to measure these things that you're describing as being like dysbiosis, then, a complete or a comprehensive stool analysis is kind of the steps that he would take to find out what's up and what's out of balance. And that in some cases, at least with this teen that I was working with, is that she had a certain imbalance of good bacteria, and that by using a very specific probiotic blend, that was able to get her balanced and get her sleeping again.
Gut issues can be a huge contributor to it. One of my favorite tests for figuring out what's going on, a couple of them actually, is a metabolic wellness panel, which looks at indican. So indican is a measure of basically maldigestion, right? If you have excess indican, then your body's not, your gut's not breaking things down. Total bile acids can be a good measure of how well your liver is clearing bile, right? If that's elevated, then that can be an indicator that you've got some liver, some gut issues going on. And then something called 8-OH-DG, which is a measure of antioxidant status. That can be really helpful, just kind of figuring out, overall oxidative stress. So that's a metabolic wellness profile. They're out there. I use a company called Fluids IQ, which is out of Canada. And what I love about this test is it's just a simple finger prick, right? And then you put the blood spots on a piece of paper and you ship it off to them, and they can give you those 3 measures. Then the other one for the gut that can be really helpful is the zonulin, histamine, and DAO panel. So zonulin is produced like when you eat gluten, for example, and zonulin, excess zonulin breaks down the tight junctions. So if you have high zonulin, right, that can be an indicator of leaky gut. And then if you have leaky gut, then you're going to have, likely leaky brain, and inflammation, in the body. So that's another one of my favorite tests, is that zonulin, histamine. Then histamine, as I mentioned, is something that if you have mast cell activation syndrome or gut dysbiosis, you can produce excess histamine, and that can really contribute to sleep issues. And they also look at the DAO ratio, like your DAO to histamine ratio. So you should have sufficient DAO, which is the enzyme that breaks down and clears histamine. And if you don't have enough, that can be a problem. And you can supplement, right? You can supplement to kind of clear histamine. You can supplement DAO. That can also be helpful. And then the last test that I really like to help figure some of this out is like a steroidal hormone test, right? So this would be cortisol, so your 24-hour cortisol rhythm. So upon waking, a half hour later, noon, I think either 6 p.m. or 10 p.m. So there's either 4 or 5, measures they look at, and then obviously testosterone, DHEA, progesterone, things like that can be really helpful to figure out if you've got, HPA axis, issues, right, going on in this system.
Well, I think that there's a misunderstanding about cortisol. People will say, "Oh, this guy's got a high cortisol because he's stressed out," and the thing is that it's not high all the time. It's actually a cortisol rhythm, as you're aware of, and that's the reason why they take multiple saliva tests, is to say, okay, you're here, and then you're here, then you're here, then you're here. And what you can have instead of like a sine wave is you can have a shifted cortisol rhythm, where normally when you wake up is when you're on the rise, you're almost at the peak of cortisol to nudge you out of bed, and then it dives down, and then when you go to sleep at night, that's where it should be the lowest. But when you have a shifted cortisol rhythm, now your cortisol's low when you wake up, so getting out of bed is just dragging out of bed. And then it starts to rise, and when it's falling, it's still high when you're going to sleep because it's on the rise, and so now you have that second wind.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And you just feel like can't, your body's exhausted, but your mind is awake.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think this HPA axis or cortisol, imbalance where you feel exhausted in the morning, and then you get a second wind at 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. or 9 p.m. sometimes, and then you can't fall asleep. So that's an example of what I would describe as adrenal exhaustion or adrenal stress. And there's various, obviously supplements you can use to get that back in line. But yeah, having that steroidal hormone 24-hour cortisol pattern can be really helpful, along with DHEA,
and so people,
testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone.
Yeah, and so people will talk about having adrenal fatigue, and a lot of MDs will poo-poo that term, but whatever you want to call it, your adrenals are kind of getting beat up, and then they need some kind of support. And so there's all kinds of adrenal support. And so when you were talking about HPA axis, and we swat it around a lot, but for people who are listening,
yes, please define
it. Stands for hypothalamic, pituitary, and adrenal axis, and it's where there's Marco Polo, they're talking to one another, and when things get out of balance, then there's a whole host of symptoms associated with that. But if you want to expound on it further.
No, I think you did a great job. One of the symptoms is obviously you wake up in the morning, you feel tired, and then you feel better in the afternoon or early evening. That's a really good sign. Or you just feel crashed all the time. You have low energy all the time. That could be a good sign that you've got dysregulation or exhaustion or stress, in that HPA.
Yeah, so adrenal fatigue and hypothyroidism has some of the same symptoms and can be misunderstood. So your doctor may check for that when really your adrenals are pooped. So a good differential for that is that you tend to have dry, brittle hair when you have when your thyroid's not operating properly, whereas with adrenal fatigue, you tend to get tired after meals, and usually if you take the time that you wake up and subtract it from the time you go to sleep and divide by 2. So if you wake up at 8 and you go to sleep at midnight, that's 16 hours. You cut that in half, that's 8. Then 8 plus 8 is 16. So it's 1,600 hours, right around 4 p.m. is when you tend to crash.
Oh.
So that's one of the tests that I've seen that's a good one. And it's not going to be exactly 4 o'clock, but people will say, oh my God, trying to keep my eye open at 2:30 or 3 is really impossible. And then that would demonstrate that you need some adrenal support.
Yeah.
And so what are your favorite adrenal support supplements?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really like support adrenals from Biomatrix. So that's one that I use personally and with my clients. Adrenal by Premier Research Labs is another one that I like quite a bit. And then ashwagandha is a kind of an adaptogen that I like. Zymogen makes one that's got a really high percentage of some of the best extracts, and those are ones that I use personally with clients.
Gotcha. And with ashwagandha, a lot of times say, well, if it's going to help me sleep, maybe I should take it an hour before I sleep. But I've spoken to a lot of physicians who say actually the sweet spot is just before lunch. Around 11 o'clock in the morning is a good time to take ashwagandha. So you can try different times and find out what works for you. But ashwagandha, if you look at some of the bottles of it, it's got a picture of someone sleeping and a picture of someone running. And the reason is because not only does it help you sleep, but it's also good for athletic performance enhancement.
Yeah, it's a great adaptogen.
Yeah,
I really like ashwagandha a lot. Yeah. Cool.
And I should also put out that the standard process has both Adrenamine and what's the other one? Is Adrenamine and maybe adrenal cortex. I can't recall, but there's 2 different products that you can get that also are pretty good. High quality.
Yeah, there's a lot of options out there that you can work with either one of us or a practitioner that help you sort of sort this out, because there's a lot of details on all this. And it really does matter, like getting to the details of what's causing your insomnia is super important.
Oh, can I throw in one of the big causes? One of the most used drug on the planet is caffeine.
Oh.
And caffeine is a bitter white alkaloid that, just like a drug, there's pharmacokinetics, and for those of you who have heard of half-life with radiation, so it's how long it takes before that radiation is cut in half. That's true in drugs as well, and the ADME thing. And so it's that half-life can be anywhere from 5 to 10 hours. So let's pretend it's 10 hours. Is that you go to Starbucks and you get 300 milligrams of caffeine in your system. 10 hours later, it's 150 milligrams, and then 10 hours later, it's 75. So 20 hours later, you still have 75 milligrams of caffeine coursing through your system.
Yeah.
So people get in this cycle of not being able to sleep if they're sleeping poorly. So they wake up and they pound a couple, and then it's self-replicating. So what I recommend is if you do an early afternoon cup of coffee or energy drink, count that. That's the first step.
Yeah,
and
great
do
point.
that for a while, and then back down. And so if your next one is at 11 o'clock in the morning, remove that. If the next one's at 10 o'clock in the morning, remove that. And you may find that you can have a single cup of coffee at 8, or maybe a second cup. Also, as he knows, that with liver clearance, the better your liver and detoxification organs are, the faster it clears from your system. And so a lot of people come in, and really what they need to do is just to ease back on the caffeine or the cocaine.
Yeah, caffeine. I mean, I love coffee, and I've really backed down the last 3 or 4 months in using, so I drink a lot of decaf, and I'll either do green tea or I'll do something called paraxanthine, which is like a caffeine derivative that this supplement developer Sean Wells developed and extracted, and it gives you all the focus and the drive of caffeine, but none of the jitters or the downside. So then that's out there. It's so I do like that quite a bit and use it regularly. It's in that Satori that I shared with you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So Satori is a product that he hooked me up with. That's in a little square plastic thing about like this and about this thick, and it's got a little tic-tac-toe board in it with little squares that has. It's got methylene blue in it. It's got the paraxanthine and whatever.
Alpha GPC, paraxanthine. And just kind of like focus brain. Enhancing compounds, things like that. I can't remember all the ingredients, but that's pretty good. Anyway, so we're getting a little offside.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a caffeine replacement. So you can have this little plastic tin of squares of these compounds, and great to travel with, right? If you're trying to avoid caffeine. Shall we move on to maybe liver, blood sugar, biliary type?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Ears are open.
Yeah. So one of the other causes of sleep issues can be, and this can get really nuanced. So the biliary system, broadly speaking, and feel free to chime in here, is this your liver, your gallbladder, and then the bile ducts that kind of control the flow. This system can get impaired for a variety of reasons, right? So, and this can be nuanced and kind of complicated, but if you have gut dysbiosis, that can cause endotoxemia, right? And then that stresses the liver. It could be environmental toxins. It could be, what we call stasis, right? So the system gets backed up, right? So you might start to form gallstones in the liver or the gallbladder, the ducts there. And sometimes you need to do a flush to get that out. Or it could be an infection, right? Parasites can get in there, or Lyme co-infections, or even viruses can really impact the liver, like cytomegalovirus or Epstein-Barr. All these things can really wreak havoc on the liver, right? And then that can cause a bunch of things. So let's pause there. Is there anything you'd add or edit to that first part?
Just that you don't have to get to such a pathological extreme as gallstones and complete blockage to have this occur. That just that they call it mud. There's not stones per se, but there's stuff that's slowing that down, and that right. So that mud or that sludge can just slow down the whole system and cause trouble. But when they do a sonogram, it may look relatively clear. So I wouldn't immediately, if your physician says, oh, you don't have any stones, you're good to go, realize that doesn't mean that your system's operating optimally.
Yeah, there's some nuance there, and that's where some of these tests that we talked about earlier can be really handy, right? So the total bile acids is a really good indicator of liver function and things like that. And indican, if your liver, if you've got good bile flow, then you're less likely to have putrefaction in the gut. That's typically what it works, not exclusively, but. Okay, so that's stasis, right? The issues with the biliary system can lead to a bunch of issues, right? So you could have timing issues, right? So the liver is trying to clear toxins at between 1 and 3 a.m. And if it's not clearing those toxins, then toxin buildup can create, wake ups typically between 1 and 3 a.m.
Or if you're eating something fatty food and you feel that tightness right in the inside of your right shoulder blade, that's a sign of a referred pain from your gallbladder. And so I see a lot of that where people go, I just can't seem to reach it, and my wife is massaging, but I can't seem to get rid of the knot. It's because it's internal.
Yeah.
And then it's also just a wiring problem where it's sending a signal and it jumps a wire, so to speak, so that it feels like it's here when it's really here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how you get that sensation in that right shoulder quadrant. Yeah, of buildup in there. So that buildup in there can cause toxin clearing problems. That can lead to sleep disturbances. And it will be evidenced often by that right shoulder, kind of right at the top of the blade, right, where you
kind of medial, between the blade and your spine.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Kind of like the rhomboids. And so one easy test is just mop some butter on some bread and eat it. And if in about 15 minutes you feel tight there, that's what your problem is.
Yeah. Okay. The other issue is blood sugar, right? So the liver has a huge role in controlling your glycogen stores, right? And so if there's imbalances in the liver, then, as we talked about earlier, the blood sugar can drop, and that'll cause you to wake up.
So a great indicator of that is just, I ask my patients, can you get through, if you miss a meal, do you start feeling hangry, or are you feeling hypoglycemic? Do you start to crash a little bit? And if people say, no, I can make it, I can skip lunch and I'm perfectly fine until dinner, then usually the sugar handling is not much of an issue. But if you find that you really do start feeling like you're going south, then that's one of the big indicators.
Yeah. Okay. So what can people do about this stuff? What is sort of your go-to if people are feeling that, right shoulder discomfort? So,
normally I would send them out for specific testing just to make sure that if they do in fact have some gallbladder issue, that there are some natural approaches. A lot of physicians will say, okay, you've got some gallstones and your gallbladder needs to be removed. And that's not absolutely necessary a good deal of the time, and that there are natural approaches. The naturopathic physicians have standard stuff. If you Google it, it'll talk about taking olive oil and
yes,
stuff like
I've done these
apple juice to kind of soften things up, and then you chug a lot of olive oil. You lie on your side so that it just blows open your gallbladder to allow it to release into your small intestine, and then you poop it out. Yeah,
I've done these. So this is typically where you prepare for a week, where you drink either malic acid, which you can buy, online, or you drink apple cider vinegar, apple cider or apple juice, and the malic acid in the apple juice begins to kind of soften, the gallstones, and you usually do that for 6 to 7 days, and then on the 7th day, as Bill's alluding to, you drink a bunch of olive oil with like lemon juice in it, and that fat just like goes to your gallbladder, and it just pumps a bunch of bile, and that often between the softening of the stones will knock them out, and they show up the next day in your stool. It's quite shocking. I've done them a number of times. It's been a while since I've done one. But yeah, so a liver flush is one option. Some of my favorites is bitters, right? I love bitters. So Quicksilver Scientific makes something called liver sauce, which has bitters in it, and also has dim and some other things in it. But that's one of my favorites. You can take that 20 minutes before a meal.
And it's been around forever.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for it.
Yeah.
Because it works.
It does work. So it can really kind of help, prepare your liver for a meal, so it's working better. It can help kind of soften things up and push things out there. What about Tudka? Have you used?
Not at all.
Yeah, so Tudka, it's a long name. It stands for, I'm not even going to try and pronounce it, Bill. You might even have a better luck than...
No, it's a tongue twister.
Yeah. But Tudka is basically a compound that's been around for quite a long time, and it can really help soften, gallstones and soften the sludge in the liver and help the liver kind of get rid of it. And then phosphatidylcholine is another one that can help with bile formation. So those are some of my go-tos. Magnesium glycinate or malate can be helpful. You can take that at night. Some people report lemon water and apple cider vinegar is a natural biostimulant. That can also help before a meal or before bed. I also like glutathione or NAC, N-acetylcysteine. So I sometimes will take like bitters and NAC before a meal, and then after I'll take some TUDCA to kind of help just kind of work on that liver and clear it out. So those are some of my go-tos to kind of help clear the bile, the liver flush, the bitters, the TUDCA, the phosphatidylcholine that kind of help with bile formation, magnesium glycinate, glutathione, NAC. These are some of the things that you can do or take to kind of help support that liver, particularly if you're feeling that right shoulder pain.
And so in Chinese medicine, we've got 2,000 herbs in the Chinese pharmacopoeia, so it's pretty complicated. And then there are formulas which are not single herbs like ginseng, but multiple herb combinations with a certain amount of each one. And like Buzhong Ichitang is one of those herbs that's good for improving digestion and that kind of thing. So if you go to nccaom.org, it stands for National Certification Commission for Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine, and you can click on Find a Practitioner, and then you can look and see those who have herbal training, and you can go to see an herbalist, or you can do acupuncture or both.
Yeah. Cool. Well, what haven't we covered? I mean, there's
I think something that we should cover is what are the negative aspects of not sleeping well. And so in our age ranges, it varies how much sleep you need. So infants need at least 10 or sometimes 12 hours of sleep. When you get to teenage years, 9 to 10 is optimal. When you get to adults, we're at 7 to 8 hours of sleep. And then when you get to seniors, they actually just need about 6 to 7 hours of sleep. So as we get older, we don't need as much sleep. And so there was a great York study in England where it literally was looking at government employees over 40-year span. And what they found was that people who had 1 hour less sleep than their colleagues had twice the chance of dying of heart disease because of the inflammatory markers increasing, and 50% greater chance of dying from anything else, including things like car accidents. And so people who are sleep deprived, when they drive, that's one of the, I don't know what the stat is for the number of deaths across the nation, but it's equivalent to a certain percentage of alcohol in our system in terms of poor reaction time.
Yeah.
So it's pretty bonkers. And 16 to 20% of Americans are on shift work. And so when you're on that shift work, you, especially swing shift work, where you might be doing nights several days and then you're doing mornings, and that can really screw up your circadian rhythm. And that also has implications to dysbiosis and other issues.
Yeah. I mean, for people that do shift work, my wife did that for a while as a nurse, and I don't know how she did it. I worked years ago. I used to work like a noon to was it 3 to 3:30 to like 11:30, something like that shift.
Okay.
And that wasn't too bad because I was still sleeping at night, but. There were people that worked a third shift, and I was like, I could never do that.
No question.
That's brutal. I could never do it. And I don't know how like special operators in the military, they operate exclusively at night. I mean, it's pretty much. So I don't know how those guys do that year on day out, and nurses and firefighters and policemen. This is rough. It's really rough on the body. So
and restaurant people, and so if when you have a patient, for those who are practitioners listening to this. Be aware that there's a lot of alcoholism in people who work for restaurants, because when you think about the average 9 to 5 drone, they get home at 5 and they do their thing, and then they go to sleep 6 hours later, right?
Yeah.
Well, when you work in a restaurant and you close at 2, do you think you're going to go home and go to sleep at 2:30? No, they tend to do the same thing. They wind down and they tend to drink. You may have a beer after work. Well, they have a beer after work too. So they're drinking at 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. And so it's just their culture. It's almost like a subculture in the US. And so if you do have someone like that, and if they're complaining of liver enzyme issues, know that whatever they say they drink, just double that number.
Cool.
So that's my input.
Yeah. All right. Well, so to recap, so sleep insomnia can have several manifestations, right? So one would be you can't fall asleep, or the other one is you wake up early, or you have multiple wake ups, throughout the night. Those are some of the more high level patterns, but they have many contributors, right? So one would be anxiety, stress. It could be job, it could be travel related. These are things that can lead to anxiety, and then you don't sleep well, and then you become anxious about not sleeping well, and it can become sort of a vicious circle. And so you can take a variety of supplements like L-Theanine or GABA, or you can try cognitive behavioral therapy or EFT, which is tapping, or even things like EMDR, NET, to kind of deal with the stress and the trauma. Those are things that you can try for that.
So the one other thing we didn't talk about, I think is hugely important, is just sleep hygiene.
Oh yeah, that's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so sleep hygiene is everything from making sure that you have a quiet environment, and that includes light pollution, because if you have any kind of light, even an LED clock will. Is that me?
Yeah. I gotta turn the AI off.
So if you have an LED clock next to your bed, then that's gonna leak through your eyelids, and that's gonna cause troubles. Temperature of the room shouldn't be too warm.
Avoid screens, excessive screen time, like an hour or two before bed.
Big time. And so you can get a blue blocker, which used to be glasses, but now you can get it in software, and you can just put it in, and then that way it changes your screen so that it's not pounding you. So when you have blue light enter your eyes late in the evening, it literally blocks your ability to produce the melatonin to help you sleep. So, and also there's some people, about 6% of the population are really sensitive to EMFs, or electromagnetic frequencies. So things like turning off your Wi-Fi when you sleep can be extremely helpful to your sleep quality.
Yeah. I've even experimented with turning off the breakers to my bedroom, and it doesn't always improve my sleep quality, but I do notice it's palpable, the difference in how the room feels, right? And it sounds a little woo, but when you go try it, you're like, oh my God, it feels like I'm camping.
Yeah, and there's great truth to that too.
Because your wiring is at 60 hertz, right? So there's a vibration there, and your body really can pick it up. It's quite striking. I actually have a client who swears by turning his breaker. He turns his breakers off at night, and his sleep is so much better. And amongst other things that he's doing. And that's been a real game changer for him. So, everybody's a little bit different, but yeah, sleep hygiene is really important.
Yep. And also charging your devices at the head of your bed is such a common mistake. And so just put it away from you. And again, it could just be, it's 5% of something that's troubling you, but 5 plus 5 plus 5
adds up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it really adds up. Okay, so some of the other contributors can be, HPA axis, dysregulation, so that's the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis. So, physical stress on the adrenals or emotional stress on the adrenals get weak. That can cause problems. Gut infections, histamine intolerance, and then the biliary and liver system, can be problematic if there's stasis, congestion. They're not clearing. That can lead to blood sugar, or wake ups at between 1 and 3 a.m. if it's more on the sort of the liver's not clearing toxins. If it's blood sugar, that tends to be 4 a.m. something like that. And then obviously the vagal tone, the autonomic nervous system can be contributors to it. So
and avoiding stimulants.
Yeah, right. Watching your caffeine intake.
Exercise. Exercise is really amazing for sleep quality. And sometimes we say that we're too busy or whatever, and you're staring at a screen all day. But boy, you get in some good exercise, you're going to sleep deeper.
Yeah. And getting exercise at the right time of day, right? So you don't want to do exercise at 8 o'clock at night if you can help it, right? Earlier in the day is typically better, because when you exercise, you're going to raise your cortisol levels, and it's going to take some time for your body to kind of come down.
Yep, and magnesium is something that's great for muscle relaxation and also for sleep quality. So it can't hurt, and going with a multi-salt product. So glycinate, and what else do you think?
Well, citrate can be helpful too. I do like citrate. Citrate definitely keeps the pipes moving, but glycinate is probably preferred for the ones that the contributors to sleep issues that we've talked about.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Bill, it's been a great conversation. Is there anything you'd like to close us out with?
No, sir. I think that we got a good coverage of the topic, and I hope that the people who listen get some value from it.
Yeah, and I'll just say that sleep is so important and can be really nuanced in terms of what's causing sleep disturbances, what we might consider contributors to metabolic chaos, which are causing you to not sleep well. It's really important to find, a practitioner who can work with you. So if you're local to the Virginia area, certainly Bill and I are available. If you're open to working remotely, I certainly can handle that as well as an FDN and functional detective. I really like working on these sleep-related issues because I've been through it and I know what it's like. Yeah. But yeah, I think really finding someone who can help guide you, ask you questions, help facilitate labs and things like that can be really helpful to getting to the root of your sleep issues. But we hope today's talk and discussion was a catalyst for thought in helping you sort through any insomnia issues you might be having. So for the Health Detective Podcast, I'm Eric Shad, FDN.
And I'm Bill Reddy, licensed acupuncturist.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Stay healthy.